A single decision that could rewrite history. A single gift that could liberate an entire nation. But what happens when that gift isn't money or gold, but a piece of land soaked in the blood of ancestors, given away by a dying farmer? This is not a fairy tale. This is the brutal and heroic truth of Mamadou Sawadogo, the man who gave his entire inheritance, 8.47 acres of land, to Captain Ibrahim Traoré, the military leader of Burkina Faso. He didn't sell. He didn't lease. He gave away his history, a curse and a promise. Why would a dying man bet his family's entire legacy on a soldier? And what secret, buried beneath that soil, could make empires tremble? Where are you watching this from in the world? Let me know in the comments below. And if you believe one person's legacy can change a nation, then stay with me to the end of this story. To understand Mamadou's earth-shattering act, we have to go back in time, back to the roar of history. At 73 years old, Mamadou wasn't just fighting the cancer that was eating away at his body day by day. No, the physical pain was nothing compared to the weight on his soul. He was the last one left. His father, an unsung hero, had fallen in 1960, machete still in hand, fighting the French soldiers who came to seize their ancestral land. His brother died in the Great Drought of 1973, choosing to starve rather than abandon the soil his grandfather had blessed with his own blood. And now, 8,047 acres of fertile land, a legacy defended through 5 generations of resistance, was set to die with him. Unless he made a choice that could either honor his bloodline or betray it forever. The knock on his door came at dusk, just as he expected. But the man who entered wasn't a government official in a suit or a foreign investor with a briefcase full of cash. It was Captain Ibrahim Traoré, the young soldier whose name was beginning to be whispered across Burkina Faso like the wind through the grain fields. "Papa Mamadou," Traoré said, his voice deep and respectful. He removed his military beret as he entered the simple mud brick home, a gesture of humility before an elder. The air grew thick, heavy with the weight of history and expectation. Old man Mamadou studied the face before him. A man barely in his 30s, yet his eyes carried the hope of an entire people. This was the man who dared to stand up to France, who had declared to the colonial powers that Burkina Faso's resources belonged to the people of Burkina Faso. But was he worthy of what Mamadou was about to give? "Sit, my son," the old man whispered, his voice frail, almost a breath. "We have much to discuss before the sun sets on my life for good." What unfolded over the next hour would change everything. But first, Traoré had to listen to a story that began in blood and would end with a choice that would echo for generations. Mamadou's old, calloused fingers trembled as they traced a line on a faded, yellowed map spread across the wooden table. Each line wasn't just a property boundary. It marked the graves of men who had died defending this land from those who wanted to steal its riches. "My father, Rama Sawadogo, was killed right here," he said, pointing to a spot near the river. "The French soldiers came for our cotton. He stood in their way with nothing but his farm tools and the fury of a man protecting his children's future." Traoré leaned forward, his eyes locked on the old man's face. He had heard whispers of this story, but never from someone who had lived it. "They took the cotton," Mamadou continued, his voice gaining strength with every word. "But they never took our spirit. My father died believing that one day, a leader would rise, one who would never let foreign hands steal what belongs to Africa." The old man paused, a heavy silence filling the room, broken only by the chirping of insects outside. He had buried more dreams than crops in this land. "I had 2 sons of my own," he said, his voice breaking. "Malaria took the first when he was just 7. The drought took the second when he was 15. They died before they could inherit what we built here." Then he looked directly into Traoré's eyes, a piercing gaze that searched the soul. "But you," he said, "you carry something in your heart that I recognize. The same fire that burned in my father's eyes. If you've ever looked into someone's eyes and seen the hope for an entire future, share that moment in the comments. Sometimes a look is worth 1,000 words." Traoré remained silent, feeling the unspeakable weight of what was about to happen. Mamadou reached into an old wooden chest and pulled out the documents, the land titles, the deeds, the irrefutable proof of his family's ownership of nearly 900 acres of the most fertile land in the region. "I am dying, Captain Traoré," he said, placing the stack of papers in the space between them. "And I have no son to leave this to. But I believe you are the son my bloodline was destined to produce." The silence that followed was deafening. Outside, the first crickets of the evening began their chorus, unaware they were witnessing a moment that would reshape the destiny of a nation. I want to give you my land, Mamadou said, his words cutting through the evening air like a blade. All of it. Every acre, every building, every seed in the ground. Traoré's eyes widened. In a country where foreign corporations and corrupt officials regularly seized land from families who had farmed it for generations, this offer was unheard of. An African farmer, willingly giving his ancestral birthright to an African leader. Not a sale, not a lease, but a total gift. Papa Mamadou, Traoré began, his voice filled with confusion. I cannot. Hear me, my son, the old man interrupted, raising a trembling hand. This is not charity. This is war. The old man struggled to his feet and walked to the window overlooking his fields. In the distance, workers were gathering the last harvest he would ever see. For 60 years, I have watched foreign companies come to our neighbors with contracts, he said. They promise development, jobs, prosperity. But the crops leave on trucks heading north. And our people remain hungry. The wealth flows out of Africa like water through cupped hands. He turned back to face Traoré. Do you know what I see when I look at you, Captain? I see a man who understands that Africa's greatest enemy is not the armies that invade us. It is the contracts that colonize us, the deals that make us rich on paper while keeping us poor in reality. Traoré felt the weight of the moment pressing down on him. This wasn't just about land. This was about faith, about legacy, about a type of leadership that could transform a nation. But a practical, compassionate question formed in his mind. But if I accept this, Traoré said slowly, what will you do? Where will you live? How will you survive? The old man smiled for the first time that evening, a smile of pure, untroubled peace. I won't, he said simply. The doctors give me 2 months, maybe 3. But if I can live my last days knowing that this land will never be sold to foreigners, never be used to enrich colonial powers, never be stolen from African hands again, then I can die as my father died, fighting for our freedom. For a century, they called Africa poor while they stole its wealth. This farmer gave his wealth to the one man who would keep it in Africa. But Traoré didn't know that Mamadou had spent months studying him, testing him, and preparing for this very moment. Before you answer, Mamadou said, returning to his chair, I need to tell you why I chose you. And it's not because of your speeches or your military rank. The old man reached back into the wooden chest. This time, he pulled out a crumpled newspaper clipping. The headline was clear: Young Officer Rejects Foreign Mining Contract. 3 months ago, Mamadou continued, a Belgian company offered you a liaison officer position for their new gold mine. The salary was 50 times what a soldier makes. Your job would have been simple: help them navigate local politics, ensure smooth operations, keep the community quiet. Traoré remembered. The offer had come through official channels, endorsed by senior officers who called it a career opportunity and a chance to build bridges with international partners. It was a golden path to personal wealth and power. You didn't just refuse, the old man said, his voice swelling with admiration. You leaked the details of their environmental impact plan to journalists. You cost them their mining license and saved 12,000 people from having their water source poisoned. This land wasn't just soil. It was memory, it was blood, it was struggle. And this dying man was giving it all away. Not for money, but for history. That's when I knew, Mamadou nodded. You were tested by greed and chose integrity. You were tempted by riches and chose your people. He paused, letting his words sink in. But then he revealed an even bigger secret, one that Traoré himself had no idea about. But there's something else you don't know about that mine. He pointed to a location on the map, about 12 miles from his own land. The gold they wanted to dig for sits directly beneath the graves of 200 resistance fighters who died in 1917, fighting the first French invasion of our region. A chill ran down Traoré's spine. He knew the mining project was wrong, but he had no idea of the site's sacred historical significance. My own grandfather is buried there, Mamadou whispered, his voice cracking with emotion. Along with 2 of my father's brothers. You protected the bones of our ancestors without even knowing it. The old man's eyes now held not just trust, but a deep, profound reverence. That's when I realized you weren't just another politician. You were the guardian we had been waiting for. His land once grew cotton for Europe. Now, it would grow food for Burkina Faso, all because of one final act of trust. But the farmer wasn't finished. What he said next would reveal the true scale of his offer and the immense responsibility that came with it. A secret more explosive than gold, buried right under their feet. This land isn't just 8,047 acres of farmland, Captain, Mamadou said, his voice dropping to a mysterious whisper. Beneath it lies something that could change Burkina Faso forever, if it falls into the right hands. Without another word, Mamadou walked to a corner of the room, where a heavy, dust-caked blanket covered something on the floor. With a strength that seemed impossible for his frail body, he pulled the blanket aside, revealing a wooden trapdoor with an iron ring for a handle. "Help me," he said, gesturing to the door. Traoré, without hesitation, joined the old man at the iron ring. Together, they heaved the heavy door open, revealing a ladder leading down into deep darkness. A cool, musty air wafted up from below, smelling of earth and decades-old secrets. Mamadou handed Traoré a flashlight and began to carefully climb down. The space below was much larger than expected. It was a carefully sealed and preserved underground cellar, but it didn't hold yams or grain. Instead, the walls were lined with wooden shelves holding hundreds of glass jars. Each jar contained mineral samples, carefully labeled with dates, locations, and chemical compositions. The floor was covered with geological surveys, mining reports, and soil analysis documents dating back decades. This was not a farmer's cellar. This was a scientist's secret laboratory, a guardian's archive. 23 years ago, Mamadou explained, his voice echoing in the still space, my nephew returned from university with a degree in geology. Before he was killed in the civil unrest of 2011, he spent years secretly testing our land. And what he found changed everything. Colonial boots once trampled that soil. Now it rises with crops, schools, and soldiers, all because a dying man believed in Traoré. The old man pointed to a detailed map pinned to the wall. Red circles marked numerous locations across his property, with numbers indicating depth and estimated reserves. Rare earth minerals, he said simply. The two words fell into the silence, but their weight could shake the world. The very elements that power the modern world: cell phones, electric vehicles, military hardware. Mamadou explained, China controls 90% of the global supply. But according to these surveys, my land holds enough rare earth deposits to make Burkina Faso completely energy independent. Traoré stared at the documents in absolute disbelief. The implications were staggering. A single rare earth mine could be worth billions of dollars. Enough to fund schools, hospitals, infrastructure projects, and military equipment for the entire nation. It wasn't just wealth, it was true sovereignty. Have you ever felt that there was a great potential, a great truth, hiding just beneath the surface of your own life? If so, share your story. Because sometimes the greatest treasure isn't gold or diamonds, but the truth we dare to uncover. Why didn't you develop this yourself? Traoré asked, his voice still stunned. Why didn't you approach the government or seek international investors? The old man's laugh was bitter. Because I have seen what happens when Africa's resources are developed by foreign companies. The wealth leaves on ships and planes while our people remain poor. Because I know that any African leader who tries to keep these resources for his people becomes a target for regime change. He looked Traoré dead in the eye, his gaze sharp as a razor. They assassinated Patrice Lumumba in the Congo. They killed Thomas Sankara, right here in our own country. They overthrew Muammar Gaddafi in Libya. All of them eliminated when they threatened Western economic interests. Now Traoré understood. Mamadou wasn't just handing him a fortune. He was handing him a potential death sentence, an unavoidable war against the most powerful forces in the world. Back in the main room, the air seemed even thicker. Mamadou, with a new energy that seemed fueled by the very act of sharing his secret, poured 2 cups of tea. His hands were now steady. The burden of keeping the secret alone had been shared, and now, only the weight of the choice remained. Now you understand, he said, sitting back down. This is not about farming or land ownership. This is about the future of African independence. He looked deeply into Traoré's eyes, the look of a father giving his last will and testament to his son. If I give this to you, he continued, you will have the resources to do what no African leader has been able to do for decades, build true economic independence. But it comes with a price. His voice hardened. The moment you begin to drill, you will become a target. France, Belgium, China, America, they will all want control of what you build. They will send spies. They will fund opposition. They will orchestrate coups. They will stop at nothing. He paused, letting that stark, brutal truth settle. Then he asked the final, most important question. Are you ready for that war? Traoré didn't hesitate for a second. I have been preparing for it my whole life, he answered, his voice firm and resolute. But then, he showed a humility that was far beyond his years. But Papa Mamadou, I need you to know something. Even if I accept this gift, even if I develop these resources, I cannot guarantee success. I cannot promise that I will not fail, or that foreign powers won't find a way to stop me. The old man nodded, a look of understanding on his wrinkled face. I don't need a guarantee, my son. I just need your promise. He leaned forward, his old eyes burning with one last fire. Promise me that you will try, that you will use what I give you to fight for our people, not to enrich yourself, that you will remember that this land was bought with the blood of Africans who refused to surrender their dignity. In life, we all face defining choices, paths that, once taken, can never be undone. Have you ever had to make a promise, a commitment that you knew would change everything? Leave a comment, because the courage to commit is the spark that starts every revolution. Traoré took a deep breath. He felt the weight of ancestral spirits on his shoulders. I promise, he said solemnly. If you trust me with this, I will use it to build something that serves Burkina Faso, not foreign corporations. I will mine these minerals with African workers, process them in African facilities, and use the profits to develop African communities. A smile of pure contentment spread across Mamadou's lips. He reached for the land deeds and a pen. With a shaky but determined hand, he signed his name on the transfer papers. A simple signature, but it transferred a history of resistance, a future of potential, and an unavoidable war. He pushed the paper towards Traoré. It is yours now, he said. Every acre, every building, every mineral deposit beneath the ground. It belongs to you, and through you it belongs to our people. With a heart heavy with responsibility, Traoré signed his name next to Mamadou's. The moment the pen left the page, a pact was sealed, not in ink, but in honor and blood. Neither man could have imagined the scale of what would follow. The dying farmer had just transferred control of what would become the most important industrial zone in West Africa and the foundation of a revolution that would reshape the entire continent. They thought it was just farmland. Traoré saw the heartbeat of a nation beneath it. 6 weeks later, Mamadou Sawadogo passed away peacefully in his sleep. He was surrounded by neighbors who had come to pay their respects to a man who gave everything for his people's future. But his death was not an end. It was the beginning of something extraordinary. Traoré's promise was not an empty word. It became immediate action. Traoré did not waste a single day. He immediately began to develop the land, but not in the way foreign investors would have. He didn't sell the mining rights to the highest bidder. He did the unthinkable, something Western economic experts called insane. He established the first fully African-owned rare earth mineral facility on the continent. The men and women whose grandfathers had once been forced to grow cotton for French textile mills on this very land were now hired to build a future for themselves. The engine of revolution began to turn. Within 2 short years, a miracle had occurred. The industrial park, named the Mamadou Sawadogo Industrial Complex in his honor, rose from the dust. It employed 3,000 local workers at wages 3 times the regional average. For the first time, wealth generated from African soil stayed in the pockets of African people. The profits weren't funneled into Swiss bank accounts. They were sown back into the very soil that produced them. 12 new schools were built, their walls echoing with the laughter of children who would never know illiteracy. 4 modern hospitals were erected, offering health care to people who previously had only fate to rely on. A technical college was founded, training the next generation of Burkinabe in mining, engineering, equipment maintenance, and mineral processing. Traoré wasn't just giving them fish, he was teaching them how to build the most advanced fishing rods. But Traoré's most revolutionary decision, the one that made world powers take notice, was his refusal of all foreign partnerships. When Chinese firms offered to supply mining equipment in exchange for exclusive buying rights, he said no. When European companies proposed joint ventures that promised international markets, he said no. Instead, he used the facility's own profits to buy the equipment outright and establish direct trade relationships with manufacturers around the world. He wasn't just building a business, he was building independence. International observers called it impossible. Financial analysts predicted failure. Western governments warned of economic instability. They were all wrong. The facility thrived, generating revenue that flowed directly into the development of Burkina Faso. Imagine you had the chance to build something for your community, something that would last for generations. What would you build? A school, a hospital, a park, or a factory? Share your ideas, because every great revolution begins with a dream to build for others. The transformation was astounding. The same land that once grew cotton for European textile mills now produced rare earth elements that powered Burkina Faso's own electronics manufacturing plants. Mamadou's final gift had become the cornerstone of a new economic model: African resources processed by African workers for the benefit of African communities. Today, a statue of Mamadou Sawadogo stands at the entrance to the industrial park that bears his name. The inscription reads, "He gave his land with empty hands, but a full heart. In return, he received immortality." The dying farmer's gift had become exactly what he hoped it would be. Not just a transfer of property, but a transfer of purpose. His land didn't just survive his death. It became the foundation for an Africa he had dreamed of but never lived to see. 10 years have passed since Mamadou Sawadogo closed his eyes for the last time. But his story did not end with his death. It multiplied across Africa like seeds carried on the wind. His legacy was no longer a single industrial park. It had become a revolution in thinking. In Burkina Faso, the Mamadou Sawadogo Industrial Complex now employs over 15,000 people across West Africa. The Sawadogo Institute of Engineering has become a center of excellence, drawing young engineers from Ghana, Mali, Niger, and Senegal to learn the skills that keep African resources in African hands. The profits from the rare earths have funded infrastructure projects connecting rural communities across Burkina Faso to the electrical grid, clean water, and the internet, amenities their grandparents could never have imagined. But the most incredible transformation happened in the minds of ordinary Africans. Mamadou's story posed a fundamental question. If one dying man could change history by trusting the right leader, what could we achieve if we acted together? The answer came in ways no one expected. In Ghana, a collective of cocoa farmers, tired of selling their beans to European chocolate companies for exploitative prices, found inspiration. They refused the old contracts. Instead, they formed their own processing facilities, creating the first fully African-owned chocolate brands that now export to markets worldwide. When international buyers threatened boycotts, these farmers remembered the dying man who chose sovereignty over security, and they held their ground. In Nigeria, oil workers went on strike, but this time, not just for higher wages. They carried pictures of Mamadou Sawadogo chanting, "He gave his land to Africa. We give our labor to Africa." They demanded that oil revenues fund local development instead of flowing into foreign bank accounts. The movement forced the government to redirect billions of dollars from overseas investments into domestic infrastructure projects. In the Democratic Republic of Congo, home to the world's largest cobalt reserves, communities began to question the bitter irony. Why should their children work in dangerous mines to power foreign smartphones, while their own villages had no electricity? They studied Traoré's model, formed worker-owned cooperatives, and demanded that mining profits build schools and hospitals in their villages, not mansions in European capitals. An idea can be more powerful than an army. A single act of courage can light up a continent. Do you believe in the power of collective action? If the story of these Ghanaian farmers or Nigerian workers inspires you, hit that like button to spread this message. Because change never comes from one person, it comes from all of us. African universities began teaching the Sawadogo model, a framework for development that prioritized local ownership over foreign investment and long-term sustainability over short-term profit. Western economists had predicted economic collapse. But the opposite happened. As more African nations adopted resource sovereignty policies, intra-African trade grew by 400%. Nations that had spent centuries exporting raw materials to Europe and importing finished goods began trading directly with their neighbors. Rare earths from Burkina Faso powered solar panels manufactured in Morocco, which brought clean energy to schools built with Ghanaian chocolate profits. For the first time in generations, young Africans began to see their continent not as a place that needed charity, but as a powerhouse of untapped potential waiting to be unleashed. On the 10th anniversary of Mamadou's death, an unprecedented event took place. 50,000 people gathered at the industrial park that bore his name. They came from every corner of Burkina Faso and neighboring countries. Traoré, now recognized as one of Africa's most effective and incorruptible leaders, stood before the crowd. But before he spoke, a young man was invited to the stage. His name was also Mamadou, the grandnephew of the old farmer. He had given up a promising career in France to return home, to work on his own family's land. "My granduncle always said that an education is meaningless if it does not serve our people," he told the journalists. He died believing that Africa's greatest resource isn't gold or oil. It's Africans who refuse to let others write their story. The grandnephew now manages the facility's expansion into lithium battery production, a project that will make Burkina Faso a key supplier for Africa's growing electric vehicle industry. Then, Traoré stepped forward. His voice boomed across the vast space. 10 years ago, he began, a dying man taught me that leadership is not about commanding armies or signing treaties. It is about earning the trust of people who have every reason to doubt you, and then proving yourself worthy of that trust every single day. He gestured towards the statue of Mamadou Sawadogo, now surrounded by flowers planted by children from every village that had benefited from the complex's projects. Papa Mamadou didn't just give me land, Traoré continued. He gave me a responsibility that I carry with me every morning I wake and every night I close my eyes. He trusted me with the dreams of his ancestors, and I have tried to honor that trust by building something they would be proud to call their legacy. The crowd fell silent as Traoré shared a detail he had never revealed publicly before. 3 days before he passed, Papa Mamadou called me to his bedside one last time. He was so weak he could barely whisper, but his message was clear. Traoré took a breath, his voice catching with emotion. He said, "Promise me, when other dying farmers come to you with their land, when other communities trust you with their resources, when other leaders ask you to teach them what we have built here, promise me you will remember that this was never just about one man's generosity or one leader's vision. This was about proving that Africans can govern themselves, develop themselves, and prosper themselves when they refuse to let others write their story." Traoré paused, looking out at the sea of faces. "Today, I can report to the spirit of Papa Mamadou that his promise has been kept. 37 African leaders have visited this facility. 12 nations have implemented similar resource sovereignty programs. Over 200,000 young Africans have been trained in the skills to keep our wealth on our continent. And every single project is funded, managed, and run by Africans who learned from a dying farmer that our greatest weapon against poverty is not foreign aid. It is African determination." The applause was thunderous, lasting for a full 15 minutes. But the silence that followed was even more powerful. 50,000 people stood in silent reverence for a man most of them had never met. Mamadou had kept his promise to his ancestors. Traoré had kept his promise to Mamadou. Now it's our turn. What will you promise the next generation? Write your promise in the comments, not for me, but for yourself and for those who will come after. Let's make this comment section a wall of commitment. That evening, as the sun set over the land that Mamadou Sawadogo had watered with his tears and blessed with his dying breath, Traoré stood alone beside the old man's grave. The headstone bore a simple inscription. He planted a seed in the hands of tomorrow. Mamadou's true legacy was not carved in stone. It lives in the minds of millions of Africans who have learned that the difference between poverty and prosperity, between dependency and independence, between colonial submission and sovereign dignity, often comes down to a single choice. Will you trust your future to those who have spent centuries exploiting you? Or will you take a risk and trust your own people to build something better? Mamadou Sawadogo made that choice in the final days of his life, and his decision continues to echo across a continent that is finally learning to write its own story in steel, sweat, and unbreakable sovereignty. They tried to write Africa's story with theft. That man in Traoré rewrote it with resilience. Somewhere on the soil of Burkina Faso, where ancestors once fell defending their home, machines now hum with the sound of independence, powered by a final act of trust between a dying farmer and the leader who refused to let his sacrifice be forgotten. The story of Mamadou Sawadogo reminds us that history is not written by kings or empires, but by ordinary people who dare to make quiet choices of courage. If you believe stories like this need to be heard, if you believe in the power of one person to ignite hope for millions, make sure you subscribe and join me as we continue to uncover the stories of courage that will reshape our world.